The sky over Aspen was a solid, somber gray. Snow fell at a leisurely pace, not in a blizzard, but in a quiet, steady drift, as if time itself had shifted to a different rhythm in this place where the world felt cleaner, quieter. Julian wasn't sure why he had walked into this particular cafe. Perhaps it was the comforting scent of cinnamon and chocolate, a stark contrast to the sterile air of his corporate jet. Or maybe it was the accumulated weariness from a week of relentless meetings and deals that felt heavier than they were worth. He had just closed a multi-billion-dollar merger, the kind of victory that should have filled him with a sense of triumph, but instead, he felt an emptiness that mirrored the vast, white landscape outside. The wooden door creaked as it closed behind him, the sound muffled by the thick winter air. The warmth of the room was a violent contrast to the icy wind, but it wasn't the temperature that disoriented him. It was the sound of a child's clear, high-pitched laugh, followed by another, softer laugh that was both a ghost and a melody he knew by heart. He turned his head and stopped dead in his tracks. Serena. She was sitting at a corner table, her long hair loose over her shoulders, wearing a thick wool sweater. Her eyes were shining with something he thought he would never see in her again. Profound peace. She was laughing at something the little boy beside her had just said, her hand gently resting on his arm. Julian's breath caught in his throat. The boy had the same dark, intense eyes as him, and the same way of furrowing his brow in concentration. Julian felt a cold, crushing certainty settle in his gut. He was staring at the life he had so carelessly thrown away. He raised his phone to his ear, pretending to be on a call. "Yes, about that clause, the merger agreement," he muttered, the words empty, a desperate anchor to the life he knew. He was a man of logic and control, but here, in this small, cozy space, a universe was unfolding without his permission. He watched as the boy, Ethan, now knew his name, licked the milk foam from the corner of his mouth, his eyes sparkling with a curiosity that came without judgment. Julian felt his own reality twisting, fracturing under the weight of this stolen moment. The boy was too young to understand the earthquake he was causing, too innocent to feel the crushing weight of the past. Julian ended his fake call, his hands trembling. He had to leave, to disappear before it was too late. But his legs wouldn't move. An invisible force, a current of regret and longing, pulled him forward, toward her, toward him. When Serena looked up and saw him, the smile on her lips withered instantly. Her back stiffened. The warmth in her eyes turned to a hard, protective shield. She didn't flee or scream. She just stared at him, like someone seeing a ghost return from the past to haunt the present. Julian stopped a few feet away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. And in that silence, Ethan looked up, his gaze clean, curious, and so completely free of the burden weighing on the adults that its purity was almost cruel. In that moment, Julian understood what true regret felt like. If you were Julian, what would you have said in that first, impossible moment? What could possibly explain years of absence, the unspoken truth? Julian sank into the chair across from Serena, as if his legs could no longer hold him. There was no arrogance in his gestures, no anger, no denial, just a dense, suffocating silence, like the stillness that precedes a breakdown. "Did you know you were pregnant?" he finally asked, his voice raw and broken, with no pretense of accusation. Serena looked him straight in the eyes. "I found out after I left. After the wedding. Or rather, the non-wedding. I was going to tell you, I swear to God I was. But then came the rumors, the newspapers, your total silence, and I was alone." Julian closed his eyes, imagining a devastated Serena, abandoned for the world to see, discovering she was carrying the only part of him that was still worth loving. And where was he? Closing deals, protecting an empire, echoing the coldness he had always hated in his own family. "Did you really believe I didn't have a right to know?" he asked, not with anger, but with a raw, almost childlike pain. Serena sighed, exhausted. "I didn't believe anything. I survived. Every day was a battle, Julian. My body was changing. The world's eyes were judging me. I focused on protecting Ethan from everything, even from you." The blow was direct and landed without an anesthetic. Julian felt the bitter taste of the truth, far more potent than any lie from the past. He wanted to argue, to say he had been manipulated, but it didn't matter. The fact was, he chose to believe a lie that drove Serena away instead of fighting for her. Ethan dropped a piece of cookie on the table, and Julian automatically picked it up and put it back on the plate. A small, mechanical gesture, but it made Serena flinch. For the first time, he had acted like a father without knowing how. The tension between them was electric. There were no shouts or dramatic tears. It was something more dangerous, a contained rage, made of old frustrations and love that had been buried alive. They were face to face, with years of silence suffocating them, and the child between them, a living symbol of everything that was lost, and everything that could still be rescued. The altar left empty. The Grand Wilshire Ballroom in Los Angeles was illuminated to perfection that morning. The sound of a string quartet echoed from the high ceilings like a promise, and the scent of white lilies mixed with the perfume of wealth, creating a dense, almost surreal atmosphere. The Los Angeles elite was present, their smiles carefully calculated, their phones discreetly ready to record what was meant to be the event of the year. In the car that would take her to the ballroom door, Serena smoothed her wedding dress with trembling hands. She breathed deeply, repeating to herself that everything would be all right, that Julian loved her, that the differences between their families were irrelevant. She was nervous, yes, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. Inside the ballroom, however, the atmosphere was changing. The officiant looked at Julian with a slight frown. The groom was pale, motionless in front of the altar, his fists clenched. His eyes weren't focused on anything. He wasn't smiling. It was as if every second was dragging him into an invisible abyss. It was then that he took a step forward and said in a low, almost inaudible voice, "Stop everything. The wedding is canceled." Silence. It was the kind of silence that swallows the air and the sound of 1,000 gasps. At first, no one reacted. There was a slight murmur, a turning of heads. Someone in the front row gave a nervous laugh, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But the officiant didn't smile, nor did Julian. Outside, Serena got out of the car. The wedding march music began. She smiled at the wedding planner, adjusted her veil, and moved forward. But she was stopped at the door by a breathless assistant, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Serena, wait!" The news hit her in fragments, scattered words, shocked faces, camera flashes already pointing at the door. She didn't need to go in. She knew, there on the steps she never ascended, that something terrible had happened. The cameras captured the instant she recoiled, the bouquet falling from her hands. Her veil, caught by a gust of wind, flew back like a cruel symbol of what wouldn't be. Serena was petrified, listening to the murmurs transform into a roar. There was no public explanation, only the absolute abandonment. Julian remained static as the room began to empty in confusion. His mother, Catherine de la Vega, discreetly picked up her purse with the calm of someone who had orchestrated everything. He, for his part, felt a growing nausea, but he didn't move. He didn't run after her. He didn't say a word. Serena disappeared that same day. She turned off her phone, cut contact with the press, and vanished from the city like a wounded shadow. She left behind the most beautiful dress she had ever worn, and a piece of herself, the part that believed love was enough. The deceitful masterpiece, the morning of the wedding, the De La Vega mansion in Los Angeles was steeped in an unusual silence. The air seemed heavier, as if the house itself sensed what was about to happen. Julian walked down the stairs with measured steps, already dressed in his tailored suit. He was impeccable. This was the day that, in theory, everything would fall into place. The heir to an empire would be united with the woman he loved. But something was out of place, and that something was waiting for him on the mahogany table in his office. A manila envelope, no congratulatory card, no dedication, just his name, Julian, written in the elegant but cold handwriting of Catherine de la Vega. The mother who always knew how to mold the destiny of others with velvet hands and venomous words. He hesitated. He knew that anything coming from Catherine was not just information, it was ammunition. Still, he opened it. Inside, there was a thick file, organized with surgical precision. Documents, images, message transcripts, records of suspicious meetings. The pages supposedly showed that Serena was involved in a legal plan to destroy the De La Vega empire from within. The narrative was clear. She, encouraged by her family of academics resentful of the De La Vega's power, had used their relationship as a way to obtain confidential data that would be used in a catastrophic lawsuit. Julian read each page with trembling hands. There were photos of Serena leaving rival law offices, doctored recordings of fragmented conversations, the names of her relatives, all logically connected. Almost too logically. "You have to understand, son," Catherine said, appearing in the office doorway as if she knew exactly what page he was on. "She isn't who you think she is. Serena is brilliant, I don't deny that. But don't be naive. She knows how to use it, and she's using it against you." "This can't be true." Julian's voice was shaky. His heart screamed for Serena, but his mind, trained for business, contracts, and cold truths, was beginning to give in to fear. "Why else do you think someone like her would agree to join this family so quickly? Do you think it was just love? Don't be naive. She was enchanted by you, yes, but she also knew exactly what she was doing. And now you have a choice, Julian. Protect what's yours or hand everything over to her." Catherine didn't shout. Her weapon was always cruel logic wrapped in maternal concern. She didn't demand. She just planted terror and then retreated from the room like someone who already knew what decision would be made. Julian stood there, motionless, looking at the pages that seemed to scream in silence. Every line undermined his certainty. And deep down, what hurt him most was that very doubt. The fact that as much as he loved Serena, he could no longer fully trust her. And a man like him, raised to dominate empires, didn't know how to love halfway. It was in this state, torn between the love he felt and the legacy he carried, that Julian made his decision. And it would cost him everything. Two paths diverge. The sound of the chimes still resonated through the ballroom as Julian walked down the steps in silence. The ceremony had been canceled, the guests were confused, and the team of advisors was trying to hold back the journalists at the door. But none of that mattered. The man who had walked away from that altar was no longer the same as the one who had walked onto it just moments before. He had left something behind, something he might never get back. Outside, Serena was already gone. There was no confrontation. There were no explanations. He didn't have the courage to face her. All he could offer at that moment was absence, an escape disguised as a decision. Serena, for her part, understood it all instantly. A man who truly loved her would have fought. He would have confronted, questioned, and demanded answers. Julian didn't. He chose silence. Serena fled the city, still in her white dress. Without waiting for her family or friends to reach her, she went straight to her apartment. She packed a suitcase with trembling hands and left. She left behind the dress, the invitations, the bouquet, the dreams, and took with her only the essentials, her wounded dignity and a pain so deep it seemed too big for her body. As she disappeared into anonymity, Julian locked himself in his concrete tower. He spent days not answering the press, not talking to Catherine, not answering calls. He just stared at the ceiling and relived, scene by scene, what he could have done differently. But pride, that old shield, still prevented him from doubting his decision. It was the right thing to do, he told himself like a mantra. If it was a lie, she would have explained it. She would have screamed. She would have come back. But he knew he hadn't given her the chance. He simply collapsed and watched everything fall apart, like someone watching the fire of a house they no longer own. The following months were a blur of meetings, trips, and contracts. Julian immersed himself in work as if he could rebuild his soul with concrete and steel. The company prospered like never before. Profits broke records. But at night, in the silence of his glass and marble penthouse, there was always an emptiness, a hollow space in his chest that no conquest could fill. Meanwhile, Serena found refuge in Oaxaca. She rented a small house and started over. It was there, alone, that she discovered she was pregnant. The news came with a profound silence. Sitting on the edge of a bed, with the positive test still in her hands, Serena felt the tears fall uncontrollably. Not from fear of the future, but from mourning for a past that wouldn't have a chance to be fixed. In the following days, she learned to breathe again. She began to practice law discreetly for vulnerable women, many of them mothers, like she would be. In others' pain, she found a mirror of her own, and in that reflection, she forged a strength she never knew she possessed. The pregnancy wasn't easy, but there was also beauty in it. The baby's kicks, the first ultrasound, the kindness of neighbors who didn't know her story, but treated her with a forgotten tenderness. She decided to name the baby Ethan, because she felt the name carried a feline strength, a courage she herself was still learning to cultivate. She promised herself she would protect him from everything, even from his father's shadow. She never lied about Julian's existence. She simply chose silence. One day, when Ethan was older, she would tell him the truth, with all its flaws, sorrows, and absences. But until then, she wanted him to grow up free from inherited disappointments. And so, two broken hearts went their opposite ways, both imagining the other was better off, when in reality, neither of them was whole. The long road back, Julian's return to Aspen, wasn't marked by announcements. He came without bodyguards, without a pretentious car, without the tie that once served as his armor. He reappeared as an ordinary man, and that was what, paradoxically, made him more visible to the right eyes. He checked into a small hotel, near a school and a bakery, where Ethan used to buy sweet bread with Serena on Saturday mornings. Julian had understood that rebuilding wasn't about making epic gestures, but about quietly repeating the right ones. And so he began his journey, not with promises, but with small, almost invisible actions. One of them was to send an anonymous monthly donation to the NGO where Serena worked. Funds sufficient to expand legal aid to vulnerable women, with no mention of his name. He also began attending community talks on conscious fatherhood and masculinity, not to be seen, but to learn. He sat in the back, listening more than he spoke. Each story told by other fathers present, each confession of a mistake or an attempt to get it right, was a mirror of his own interrupted journey. Over time, Julian began making discreet visits to a children's library where Ethan participated in story circles. He didn't announce himself. He simply sat in the back and watched the boy interact with the stories and his peers. He started to understand the small details that a real father captures. The frown when Ethan didn't understand something, the way he chewed his lower lip when he was concentrating, the quick laugh when he felt comfortable. In one of those encounters, Ethan tripped and fell while running. Before Serena could get to him, Julian was already by his side, kneeling, holding his elbow with care. "Are you okay?" he asked, worried. Ethan, with tears in his eyes, just nodded. And it was in that silent exchange that something changed. It wasn't the act of helping him that moved Serena. It was the fact that Julian didn't try to be a hero. He was simply there, present. Days later, Serena approached him outside the library. "Sometimes he asks about you," she said in a low voice, "but I don't know what to tell him." Julian, surprised by her openness, didn't ask for more. He just said, "Tell him the truth, that I'm trying to learn how to be a dad, even after I messed up badly." That honesty, without pretense or defenses, began to break down the wall around Serena. She still watched him with caution, but there was no longer fury in her eyes, only weariness and, perhaps, a hint of curiosity. Over the following weeks, he was timidly invited into small moments. A quick coffee, a visit to the park. Board game, nothing formal, nothing definitive. But they were cracks, and he learned to treat them with respect. Julian discovered that being a father wasn't about making Ethan love him quickly. It was about being available, even when the boy was irritable or silent. It was about accepting that he might call him Julian for a long time before anything else. It was about knowing when to back away and when to extend a hand. And in each small, accepted gesture, he discovered that true love didn't require a performance, just presence. Do you think Serena's caution is justified? Or is she holding on to the past too tightly? A different kind of home. The rain began timidly that night in Oaxaca, as if the sky was still hesitant to fall apart. Serena was locking up the NGO after a long day, documents under her arm, and her mind numb with exhaustion. But there, leaning against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets and his face wet from the fine drizzle, Julian was waiting for her. She didn't startle. She just looked at him as one would a familiar shadow that insists on not disappearing. "What do you want, Julian?" she asked, with no coldness, but no welcome either. "To talk to you, just once, without interruptions. Just to have you listen to me," he said, with a calm that seemed to come from a huge effort. Serena hesitated. The parking lot was empty, the city submerged in a silence that only fine rain can bring. She took a deep breath and gave in. Inside the NGO, they sat in chairs facing each other, separated by the exact distance of two very wounded pasts. He didn't know where to start, but the words began to come out as if they had been building up for 5 years. "I received a file the day of the wedding, a fake document put together by my mother. It had photos, messages, everything fabricated to make it look like you were using me, that your family was planning to sue us." Serena didn't react immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on him, but they were analyzing, not softening. He continued, his voice cracking. "I didn't question it. I didn't fight for you. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing the legacy. And instead of fighting for us, I chose what I knew. Power. Coldness. And I lost everything." Serena's breathing grew heavier, but she didn't interrupt him. Julian lowered his head, as if confessing was an exhausting physical act. "When I found out about Ethan, when I saw that boy with my eyes, I realized the punishment had already begun long before. I just didn't know what to call it. Finally, the silence fell between them. The rain was now drumming against the windows. Serena got up slowly and walked to the window. When she spoke, her voice was low but firm. Do you know what hurts the most? It wasn't the abandonment or the public shame. It was knowing that, in the moment I needed you most, you chose to trust a lie instead of trusting me. What we had wasn't just anything, Julian. I loved you, and you chose to erase me. He stood up, but didn't approach. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to take responsibility. Because forgiveness, I know, isn't something you can demand. It can only be hoped for. She turned to him, her gaze full of held-back tears. Then hope. Hope like I hoped. For a gesture, for a word, for an explanation. I raised Ethan alone, Julian. Every fever, every fear, every victory, and you weren't there. Julian didn't respond. He just nodded, accepting the open wound without defense. And there, in the middle of the empty room, they both understood that the truth doesn't always heal. It simply exposes. And forgiveness, when it comes, is like the rain. It needs time, space, and the freedom to fall. A new legacy. The flight back to Los Angeles was silent. Julian spent the hours looking at his reflection in the plane's window, seeing his own image distorted by the darkness of the sky. For the first time, he didn't know exactly what to do. Only what he could no longer be. Upon landing, he went straight to the De La Vega mansion. Catherine was waiting for him in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand and a controlled smile on her lips. I see you decided to return to the real world, she said, her eyes not wavering. I was in the real world for the first time in a long time, Mom, he replied, calmly taking off his jacket. And now I've come for what I'm missing. The truth. The dialogue wasn't explosive. Catherine never shouted. She was a master of manipulation through subtext. She tried to deflect, to minimize it. She said she had done everything to protect the family, that a woman's love couldn't be more important than generations of legacy. You were born to lead, Julian, not to kneel for a youthful mistake. But he was no longer the same man who had trembled before her false file. You destroyed something I'll never fully get back, and you used my name as an excuse. But it's over. You no longer speak for me. Catherine fell silent for a moment. Then, for the first time, she let slip a fraction of the truth. She would have taken everything from you. No, Julian responded. You took it from me. And what's left, I don't even know if I want it anymore. The next morning, Julian submitted his resignation as CEO of the De La Vega empire. He sold his majority stake, transferred properties, and closed corporate accounts. He did what no one thought he would have the courage to do. He gave up everything, not as an escape, but as a liberation. The power that once sustained him was now poisoning him, and he knew he needed to rebuild himself from scratch. The newspapers reported his disappearance from the business elite, but he didn't care. For the first time, headlines didn't matter. What he wanted now didn't fit in the business columns. It was simple, brutal, and profoundly human. To reclaim his dignity. And if one day he was worthy of it, to earn the right to be a part of his son's family. He left the city without looking back, carrying only a small suitcase and a name that, for the first time, he wanted to rebuild with his own hands. Julian's return to Oaxaca wasn't marked by a grand entrance. Without bodyguards or a flashy car, he reappeared as an ordinary man. He settled into a small apartment near a school and a bakery where Ethan used to buy sweetbread with Serena. Julian had understood that rebuilding wasn't about making epic gestures, but about quietly repeating the right ones. And so began his journey, not with promises, but with small, almost invisible actions. He sent an anonymous monthly donation to the NGO. He began attending community talks on conscious fatherhood, not to be seen, but to learn. He sat in the back, listening more than he spoke. Each story told by other fathers was a mirror of his own interrupted journey. Over time, he began making discreet visits to a children's library where Ethan participated in story circles. He simply sat in the back and watched the boy interact with the books. He started to understand the small details that a true father picks up. The way Ethan would frown when he didn't understand something, the way he chewed his lower lip when he was concentrating, the quick laugh when he felt comfortable. In one of those encounters, Ethan tripped and fell while running. Before Serena could get to him, Julian was already by his side, kneeling, holding his elbow with care. "Are you okay?" he asked, worried. Ethan, with tears in his eyes, just nodded. In that silent exchange, something changed. It wasn't the act of helping that moved Serena. It was the fact that Julian didn't try to be a hero. He was simply there, present. Days later, Serena approached him. "He sometimes asks about you," she said in a low voice, "but I don't know what to tell him." Julian, surprised by the openness, only said, "Tell him the truth, that I'm trying to learn how to be a dad even after I messed up badly." That honesty, without pretense or defenses, began to break down Serena's walls. She still watched him with caution, but there was no longer fury in her eyes, only weariness and perhaps curiosity. Over the next few weeks, he was timidly invited into small moments. A quick coffee, a visit to the park, a board game. Nothing formal, nothing definitive. But they were cracks, and he learned to treat them with respect. Julian discovered that being a father wasn't about making Ethan love him quickly. It was about being available, even when the boy was irritable or silent. It was about accepting that he might call him Julian for a long time before anything else. It was about knowing when to back away and when to extend a hand. And in each small, accepted gesture, he discovered that true love didn't require a performance, just presence. Finding a home in the ruins. The first week of his new life, Julian found a small studio apartment near the heart of Oaxaca, far from the tourist zones. The walls were uneven, and the windows rattled, but it had a small balcony with a perfect view of the quiet, winding streets. He spent his days exploring the city, volunteering at the NGO, and, most importantly, simply being present. He and Serena began meeting at a small cafe not far from her work. It was in one of these meetings that she finally confessed to him a truth that had been on her mind for weeks. "I'm worried about Ethan," she said, her voice soft. "He's starting to ask questions about his father, about why you weren't there, and I don't know how to explain it without hurting him." Julian listened carefully, his heart in his throat. This wasn't a test. It was an invitation. "I think the best thing we can do for him is to tell the truth. Our truth. That we loved each other, but that we both made mistakes, and that we're trying to fix them now. For him." Serena nodded slowly, her eyes searching his. "He's 5, Julian. He won't understand concepts like manipulation and legacy." "He doesn't have to," Julian said. "He just has to understand that we lost each other, but that we found our way back." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ethan, who ran to his mother and then to Julian with a shy smile. "Julian, can you help me build a new dinosaur house?" "I'd love to," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. He knelt down, and together, they built a small house with Legos, a home for a family of plastic dinosaurs. It was a simple, powerful moment of connection. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Julian and Serena sat on her small porch, the sounds of the city's nightlife a distant hum. The air was cool and quiet. "Thank you for being honest with me," Serena said softly. "It means everything." Julian looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. I should have done it a long time ago, but a part of me was afraid of what you would say. I was angry, Serena admitted. I still am sometimes. But I'm also tired of being angry. I think I'm ready to try to find a way forward. Julian didn't say anything, but he reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. It was enough. Over the next few months, their relationship grew slowly, patiently, like a plant in the desert. They moved into a bigger apartment, a place for all three of them. Julian opened a small architectural firm, specializing in affordable and sustainable housing. His first client was a local NGO, the same one where Serena had worked for so long. They worked together, side by side, their passions intertwining once again. One day, they were sitting together, sketching out a design for a new project. Ethan was sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. He looked up at them, his eyes full of a new understanding. "Julian," he said, "are you my dad? You mean my dad?" The question hung in the air. Julian looked at Serena, and she gave him a small, encouraging smile. This was it. "Yes, Ethan," Julian said, his voice trembling. "I am." Ethan's face didn't change. He simply nodded and went back to his drawing, as if the truth had been an accepted fact all along. A moment later, he looked up again, his face a perfect picture of innocent curiosity. "Can you help me draw a house for a dinosaur who lives far away from his family? He looks kind of lonely." Julian felt a wave of love wash over him. "I'd love to," he said, his voice filled with emotion. He knelt beside his son, and as they worked, he felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. He had traded his empire for a small apartment, his power for a child's hand, his solitude for a life full of purpose. He was no longer a man of great wealth, but he had something far more valuable. A home built on honesty, forgiveness, and love. What do you think will be the most difficult part of Julian and Serena's future? If you enjoyed this story, consider sharing it with a friend who appreciates a good tale of second chances and personal growth.